How I milked my neighbor's goat in 10 minutes. Hi guys, I'm KH and if you ever met anyone crazier than I consider myself fun to be with it. You can actually get crazy with me. I would take up adventures simply because it was just an adventure. For reasons which I can't properly understand, I have always had a level of curiosity you don't get to see in most people you meet on a daily. Some say curiosity killed the cat. Well, for KH curiously was her life wire. The very thing that kept her going. My curiosity always gave me something new to focus on and a direction in which I could channel my energy. I would swim through land or walk on water just to find answers about certain things that puzzled me, and trust me, I always had questions. My head seems to always question the reason why things were the way they were. The cause and effect of certain actions taken. This has made me learn by experience 1,000 ways things don't work. For instance, one time while I was just 3 years old, I got surprised when I closely observed that a newly wedded couple that was our next-door neighbor. I could tell her stomach of the wife was increasingly getting bigger than Mummy's own. This gave me quite a great bit of concern because Mummy was older than her and by default should have the bigger stomach. While I was still trying to put pieces together, I discovered that the size was no more as big as it was, but she now carried a child smaller than myself. I couldn't help it anymore, and so I walked up to Mummy, who seemed rather happy. This woman was beating her to the belly race. "Mummy, from where did she get the baby?" I inquired. "She got it from within her," Mummy said. "Who put it within her?" I further asked. "Well, she has always had it within her, she just decided to bring it out now," Mummy replied, cleverly avoiding details that were not fit for a 5-year-old. I wasn't satisfied, and it was no new knowledge that I won't leave until my curiosity had been satisfied and my questions answered. How did she bring it out? Does she still have any more left in her? While Mummy was still figuring out a way of escape, I gave the final blow. "Can you bring out a baby for me now?" At this point, a dad who was amused and thrilled altogether by the uncommon intelligence displayed by me just like other times burst out laughing as he picked me up from the ground. "Yes, when Mummy is ready, she will bring out one," he said while passing her a naughty glance. Though my curiosity was still not satisfied yet, I had the promise of a baby which I eagerly now looked forward to, and so I let the sleeping dog lie. Children have a knack for imitating what they see others do. Well, KH was not your regular kid. If I wasn't imitating what I had seen, I was initiating what I had imagined. This lesson my parents learned very early, and so while great caution was taken when doing certain things while I was around, they equally paid close attention when I was on my own because I was always up to something. Fast forward to a year later and I had my 4th birthday party being celebrated. It was usually fun, and this time was no different. The colorful event had neighbors, friends, and well-wishers come over. While they sang the traditional happy birthday song, my eyes were fixed on the 4 lit candles which I was expected to blow out. And as you will rightly guess, I had questions. One of the reasons you would want to avoid my questions is because I usually paid attention to details others might pass on as insignificant. I won't say that I have a photographic memory, but I clearly remember that during last year's birthday celebration, I had just 3 wax candles to blow out. But now they were 4. One thing I find fascinating is the fact that I was never allowed to eat them. What in the world were candles doing on a cake when you are not allowed to eat them? Did they make the cake sweeter? Why were they now 4? I could have gone on a quest to get answers from Mummy and Daddy almost immediately. But it was my birthday party and they were all over the place, and I won't get the attention I needed. If I was going to get answers, I would have to find them myself, and so I began to hatch a plan. The taste of the pudding has got to be in the eating, so if you ever come around and get served something nice with candles in it, the whole credit shouldn't be given to Mum because your baby girl equally paid the cooking pot a visit. Standing in front of the mirror, I had never been more proud and excited. The holidays were over and today was resumption day. Mum and Dad would finally heave temporal sighs of relief as I'll be away from home for a few hours. I was already 16 and from all indications, I got wilder and more inquisitive with age. Mom had finally fulfilled the promise of bringing out a baby 2 times over. Keeping up with my siblings was not really going to be a difficult task. No, they already dealt with KH Low. Unlike me, my 2 siblings were just regular kids who were only intrigued by things they saw but lost interest immediately they saw something else. Yeah, they were easily distracted, but it was going to be easy keeping them on a leash. I was quite popular in school. I don't really know how I do it, but it just seemed real easy making my presence felt. One way or another, KH Low would always happen. I had no issues making friends. If you could get crazy, then we could be besties. Teachers knew me for me. Quite a few had noted that they were always glad when rounding up a lesson. I asked questions that kept them on their toes. Don't get me wrong, even though my questions could seem and sound naughty, they didn't stem from a motive to cause mischief but from a desire to learn. If I have already painted the picture of a girl who always came out of every adventure decked in glory, then please accept my apology. Curiosity, like most things, has got its pros and cons, and for a girl who was always on the go, I got into some kind of trouble every now and then. Most times, they were life-threatening, and other times, they just simply created foes. I have had to be rescued from a fire incident started by me. A friend had to be rushed to the emergency room, all because she joined me in an expedition that didn't really come out as planned. In a church, at a party, in school, and everywhere KHLO has been, I have had an unfair share of being criticized more than celebrated. Whenever KHLO happened, it was really easy to see me as a kid without a proper home upbringing who was sore on the skin of everyone, especially her parents. But if I pull off a stunt that ends well, my parents were considered fortunate to have me in the family. We have had visitors come to our home at odd times. Some came to plead with my parents to keep me far from their children, others came to issue warnings to me right in front of my parents. Well, it never really bothered me the least bit. I always try to be KHLO, and there are times it's synonymous with danger and destruction or glory and fame. So when next you seem to envy me, just remember that there are always two sides to a coin. Like every other student, I did have certain subjects that easily appealed to me. One of which was biology. Each topic just gave me so many avenues for adventure. So now you can understand my excitement when the first teacher to step into the class was the biology teacher. She immediately had my attention when she announced that we were going to study the reproductive system of animals. No sooner had she said so did I find myself walking the part of a pleasurable memory lane. It all started at the end of last semester when our final topic was the human reproductive system and reproduction. I had listened with rapt attention as she explained the steps involved taken before reproduction can occur. This was really a bad time to become KHLO, but it was too late. I'm always KHLO. I then realized I was just like Mom and the neighbor. I equally had babies in me. Now it wouldn't hurt to bring out one, would it? Of course, now I know that it takes two to tango. I needed someone willing to tango. The holidays were around the corner and I didn't know if I could utilize it. A 3-day visit to Granny was all the opportunity I would get. It was actually a tradition for us to pay Granny a visit every end of the year. There we had our Thanksgiving as a family. We got to know some cousins who we'll never think about once we left. Grandma was not Granny in every sense of the word. She was a 75-year-old woman who still had the strength of a 50-year-old, and had always been an ardent advocate of morality and discipline. Arrangements were made when she turned 65 to get someone to assist her. But she vehemently opposed it. She hated to think of herself as being so vulnerable she would need a helper. A blow from arthritis at age 70 had her reconsidering her stance. This was when Dave was introduced into the scene. A grumpy 12-year-old who just sat around waiting for instructions. Not much is known about Dave's past except that he was the 5th child of a woman who had 6 children for different men. His mom lived a promiscuous life, and she took in for several men who either denied being responsible for the pregnancy or abandoned her to raise the kids alone, as some of them were already married with kids. This further led her into prostitution as a means of livelihood. She learned by experience that being a single mom barely had any advantage, as she was now plagued with a level of poverty so intense that the kids were neglected. When it became apparent that the income she generated through her trade was not going to be enough for her and the kids, she decided to initiate those old enough into one vice or the other. For the 2 girls who just became teens, she would often send them to spend the night with various men, and they would return with the proceeds by daybreak. They were quickly exposed to the lifestyle of sex and drugs. The boys were not spared either. Once they were old enough to run, she sent them out to the streets to go pickpocketing. The home quickly became an abode for criminals. While Dave turned 3 years, his mom sexually contracted a deadly disease and passed away. Now being orphaned at an early age, he was sent into the orphanage home pending when foster parents were willing to adopt him. Although the kind of lifestyle Dave experienced in his home was not really present at the orphanage was no kinder to him. The matrons placed over the children always diverted the funds and foodstuffs donated by well-meaning individuals and firms, and this caused the children to be malnourished and neglected to a great extent. The kids soon got used to the lifestyle of survival of the fittest. bullying was a constant feature in the house, and it was no news when you heard that a kid had run away from the home. If brought back to the orphanage, the kid was made to face severe punishments just to make sure he never repeated the act. Dave ran away twice. The first time was when he was 7 years of age, and the second time was when he was about clocking 12 in 3 days. It was while my dad was at the orphanage making inquiries about the adoption process that he saw Dave being led back into the home. The look on the faces of other children suggested that Dave was in for a treatment he knew too well. There was just something about the whole scene that Daddy could relate to. Upon further inquiry about Dave, he saw so much of himself in Dave that he decided that he, Dave, fit the profile of the individual Grandma needed around. Of course, Dave would need to have some work done on him, but Dad was convinced Grandma was well suited to handle Dave. After all, she did a good job on him years back. And Dave was really no different. He was just going through the same things Dad experienced years ago. My dad was the first of 3 children, all from the same couple. He was the product of pure love between 2 couples. Unlike Dave, he knew his father and had the temporal privilege of enjoying a father's love. He was full of life until his father lost his life in a ghastly motor accident. At the age of 6, he had become fatherless. His mom tried all she could to fill up the space created by her husband. She took up multiple jobs and even turned down a couple of suitors who had proposed marriage because she felt that they might not totally love her kids. The demands of her jobs occasionally made her unavoidably absent from the life of her kids, and this began to affect them negatively. Dad soon becomes an object of ridicule in class. He was not spared the torments of bullies, and this further caused a decline in his grade. He gradually became a recluse, cutting off from the rest of the world when he still had a lot to offer. The kid who was once full of energy and positivity now battled with low self-esteem. He saw himself amounting to nothing and thought that he would die soon. A thought that he saw as a relief since it would put an end to his misery. Grandma often came home late at night and was always too tired to check up on how the day went for the kids. So it took a while before she noticed the mess she had made. She immediately began making adjustments by cutting down her work hours, visiting the kids in school twice a week, and spending more time with them at home. As soon as Dad started getting the reassurance of his mother's love, he began standing up to the bullies in school because he knew his mom would show up to his defense as she once did when she confronted a bully who regularly picked up on Dad. She reported the matter to the school authorities and the boy was suspended for a while. As time went by, Grandma rebuilt his confidence and self-esteem. She made him always seek something positive in any negative circumstance. Thanks to Grandma's resilience, Dad turned out great, and he knew she could do the same for Dave. Making our way to the front porch of Granny's house, we were greeted by the now 17-year-old Dave who, although was far from being a fine gentleman, was now so full of life. It was no surprise. Grandma's recipe had worked just as Mom and Dad said it would. It always worked. It worked on Dad and it helped shape him into a man very conscious of how limited time is. Although Dave was so eager to please everyone, it was the night before we left that I paid attention to him. I was actually keeping him at arm's length because there was really nothing about him that appealed to me. The house was finally crowned as uncles came with their families. This time year alone, we had 5 babies added to the family. The rooms were filled up and the kids were made to share the same room with Dave. Deep into the night, you could hear the little babies crying in the other room, and while it kept me from falling asleep, everyone else had dozed off, or so I thought. The babies reminded me of the reproduction lessons we had had and my desire to explore. While I tried taking my mind off it, Dave sleepily crossed his hand over me, laying it on my belly. I made to brush his hand aside, but that became my undoing as it grazed the tip of my breasts. That sent a sweet tingling sensation running down my body, and I had to now move my body in a rhythmic fashion to ensure a repetition of body contact. Before long, I felt something rock-hard poking and rubbing me. In no time I found myself guiding his hands down a warm, moist, and slippery path which felt so good. I then wondered why my teacher skipped the part where you find yourself on the moon. A shout from Grandma was what it took to end a journey that had barely begun. She had fallen down while making her way to the restroom. We were all surrounding her in no time, and she had to be rushed to the clinic where she was admitted for the night, and Mom and Dave had to stay with her. By morning, she was declared all right but advised to rest a lot. Dad picked up Mom, Grandma, and Dave from the clinic before taking us back home. I was really frustrated as I had some unfinished business. Standing on the porch and waving goodbye as Daddy drove off was Dave, who I was certain couldn't wait for the next Thanksgiving. I may not have completed this expedition, but it gave me a renewed passion to seize the opportunity when next it came. Wherever it came, back to the classroom, the lesson was delivered as expected. We specifically learned about the reproduction of a goat and how it breastfed its kid. The whole class was almost thrown into a frenzy at some point when the teacher mentioned that a kid wasn't the only one who took goat milk. Humans equally did. You could literally see the look of disgust on our faces. It was very difficult putting the pieces together. If we took the same milk the goats did, can we be called goats? Why don't we have the same horn they had? Why don't we walk on all fours just as they did? Why don't we bleat the same way they did? Can we eat the grass they ate and still stay healthy? The teacher very well knew that he had some questions to answer, but he wanted to keep us anticipating the next class, so he decided not to take questions today. I've never had the patience to wait for an answer. You either give it to me now or I get it now. I wasn't going to let this pass, and you could bet on it. I needed to know if I belonged to the family of goats. Immediately I got home, I headed straight for my laptop. It was one of the tools which aided me in fact findings. I started surfing the web looking for goats and answers. After a few minutes, it became clear. Humans actually consume goat milk, but it passed through processes that made it safe for us. Wow, I was glad I wasn't a goat. Curiosity further led me into watching how this goat milk was obtained. I watched the milking process. It looked very easy, and I knew that I could do it. I knew I would do it. This time, I won't need a partner. I only need a goat. For the very first time in a long time, I almost believed I had run out of ideas. How was I going to lay my hands on a goat? Every possible means seemed to have its own hurdle. I couldn't visit the zoo just to milk a goat. I couldn't suddenly ask Mom and Dad to get me a goat as a pet. We already had 3 dogs which regularly made messes I had to clean up while fuming with rage. They would definitely know that I was up to something, and I am not keen on bringing them in on my next point of gender. The only option remaining on my list happened to be Mrs. Coker, a neighbor whom I disliked. I may be overreacting, but she always seemed more creepy and less friendly to me. Her constant smiles wouldn't make me budge on my stance. She was a 40-year-old divorcee with a daughter my age, and rather than remarry, chose to surround herself with various kinds of animals for pets. Well, I doubt she had suitors who wanted to marry her. She looked like a goat and weighed like a cow, and although she didn't have suitors, she had cows. Goats, horses, dogs, chickens, and kittens. Her home was like a mini zoo, but if I ever get to milk a goat, it was going to be hers. There were stories of her past that we were not sure were false. Rumor had it that most of the women in her family didn't have stable homes. Her grandmother was a divorcee, and so was her mum. She grew up in a home that was filled with abuse. She had watched his mother always got in an argument with her father, who ended up beating her most of the time. Her dad soon began bringing other ladies into the house just because he claimed that his wife, who nags a lot, has refused to get intimate with him since they last had an argument. It was said that rather than try to make up with her husband, her mum now decided to return the favor by equally bringing men into the home just to have sex with them. She often paid these men, who were sometimes younger than her. Her husband decided to get a divorce from her when he once walked in on her making love with a man, and they were both naked. Mrs. Coker had seen all this, and it had quite an impact on her. She saw marriage as a thing to be dreaded. She made up her mind never to get married, but at the age of 25, she saw herself in the home of a widower who had proposed to marry her after she got raped and impregnated. Not wanting to face life alone with a child by her side, she reluctantly accepted, but things didn't work out as she thought. The widower was a man who refused to bring anything to the table. He just exploited Mrs. Coker. It was when he beat her up for refusing to give him the money she didn't have that she knew that she would be better off alone with her daughter. She divorced him and decided to start rearing animals as a means of dealing with the loneliness she felt. Mrs. Coker became a farmer who randomly shared her proceeds with the neighbors on weekends. She didn't have any mouth to feed except her daughter Meg, and so, you would often see them hand in gloves, going to families to distribute eggs, milk, or some dairy produce. She was loved by all except me, and whenever I was greeted by their smiles, I returned them with a scripted grin. Parents would sometimes drop off their children with them, and they took no small delight in teaching them practical agriculture. This was the part I wanted. Practical agriculture. Practically milking a goat, but if I was going to be a student, I would need to like the teachers, or at least pretend to. Her daughter took after her in looks and size, and eventually surpassed her mom. She looked like a goat, weighed like a cow, ate like a horse, and drank like a camel. In fact, it seemed as though anything she did was done in excess. An attitude that I found really offensive. In class, she ate in excess, laughed in excess, played in excess, and fought in excess. The only thing she never had in excess was good grades. You could say she failed in excess. At one time, she seized every opportunity to get close to me, but she wasn't the kind of friend I wanted. I love people who are crazy, not stupid. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and it was clear that I had to now extend a hand of friendship if I was ever going to get near the goats. Without wasting time, I started executing my plan the next day in school. It wasn't difficult finding an opportunity as I knew she always never did her assignments at home. She had to copy it from someone else in school. I was going to save her today. I gave her my book, which she hastily took, and that began our friendship. While she saw me as an escape route to better grades, I saw her as the path that leads to the goats. This sudden relationship progressed at a very quick pace, and she soon started coming over to our house so we could do the assignments which we were given in school. As you would rightly guess, I did the assignments and just copied them. Before long, she became a regular visitor at our home, and although my mom and dad were very much surprised as everyone else was, they were not against the friendship as it meant we received more agricultural produce. You could call me a manipulator, but I was getting close to my goal. And besides, our relationship was mutually beneficial to everyone involved. I was helping her get good grades, and it was only fair she helped me get some good milk. Did I really like her personality? No, I didn't. Was she ever going to be more than access to milking the goats? I don't know. What happens to the relationship after I get the milk? I don't know. Time will tell. When I got to that bridge, then I would figure out how to cross it. Meg didn't show up in class on a Thursday, and word soon got out that she had taken ill. On getting home, I informed my parents about it together. We all went to visit her. It turned out that she had caught a cold, but it wasn't so serious. The doctor advised that she took out time to rest, and this meant that she had to stay away from the animals. We weren't the only ones who came visiting, but as her friend, I quickly made myself feel at home. The animals were yet to be fed that evening, and I readily offered to help Mrs. Coker feed them. My parents left without me as I was still tending to the animals while Mrs. Coker received the visitors and tended to Meg. When it was time to leave, Mrs. Coker was very grateful that I came around as she was already too busy to tend to the animals. I told her it was no big deal. I was just being there for a friend. I promised to come by every day to check up on Meg and help feed the animals. My parents were really impressed with the attitude I displayed, and they commended me for it. I eagerly anticipated my arrival at the Coker farm residence. I was greeted by the ever-smiling farm owner, who couldn't hide her excitement at my arrival. I went to check up on Meg, who was observing a bed rest just as the doctor advised. I needed to bring her up to speed on what has been going on in school before I'll feed the animals. While I was discussing with Meg, her mom interrupted us, saying that she had to go down to the pharmacy to pick up the drugs the doctor prescribed for Meg. Immediately she left, I rounded up my session with Meg and headed straight for the animals. I quickly attended to the other animals but saved the goat for last. Upon finishing with the other animals, I realized that I had a few minutes before Mrs. Coker arrived and put a stop to my escapade. This was the moment I had been waiting for, and I wasn't going to wait any longer. I quickly rushed over to the section where the goats were kept, and without much thought, I descended on the first goat I could lay my hands on. It seemed harder than I thought, as I found it difficult to get the goat to release some milk. I was doing exactly what I had seen in the video which I watched, or so I thought. I finally reached a milestone in the 10th minute when the goat released a gluey substance. But my joy was short-lived after I examined the substance, and it didn't look like the milk I had seen. Then I froze when I discovered that I was in a hurry, that I forgot to check the gender of the goat. Oh my God, this was a male goat. I was mad. Have I come all this way for nothing? Did I unwillingly enter into a relationship with the Cokers all for nothing? Did I tend to the sick, and had all her assignments done all for nothing? What was I going to do? Do I immediately start all over again? I knew it was not possible, because Mrs. Coker was probably on her way back. I had ruined my opportunity to milk a goat, and I didn't know when next it was going to come. I didn't know when next Meg would fall ill, and her mom would leave her in my care to go and get drugs. Another thought seemed better. What if I just opened up to Mrs. Coker that I would love to milk a goat, that way? I would not have to be looking over my shoulders or hoping that someone gets ill. Hey guys, what will you do if you were me? Would you continue with the friendship that you never really wanted? I would love to know your thoughts about it.